Fantastic. Okay, we have one hand up, so I'll take that as a we are ready to rock and roll. Fantastic. Brilliant. Right, okay, brilliant. So what we're going to do is going to get started today. The session we're going to be talking about is assessing students' understanding in GCSE PE. There's two elements that we're going to be looking at today. The first of all, we're going to be looking at questioning to begin with and feedback. And the biggest thing I'm going to talk about tonight is the fact that both are very, very, very closely interlinked. So when I talk about one thing, there's going to be elements of the other in it. So just be aware of that as we go through. To get us started, just going to go through. There's four areas we're going to go through tonight. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but you're going to get this presentation sent through to you, so you'll be able to obviously unpick it at a later date as you need to. And there's quite a lot of content in there as we go through. First bit, we're going to understand about questioning and what makes it good and how to improve it. Second part, we're actually going to start looking at different questioning techniques. Part 3, we're going to look at feedback and actually find out what elements of feedback make it effective. And then at the last session, we're going to be looking at making feedback work and how we can actually use that in the classroom with our students. Now, in the bottom right-hand side corner, we have the chat box. So I just want to give you 30 seconds. There are a number of questions on the screen at the moment. And all I'd like to do is just answer in the chat box. What do you think the answer are to some of these questions? So first one being, how much the teacher's instructions involve questioning? Obviously, on average, how many questions a day do teachers ask? How frequently do we ask questions? And how long do we give students to answer questions? So if you can kind of link it. There we go, yeah, fantastic. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, you can just give a couple of answers, that'd be really, really good. Brilliant. Here we go. So just finish for the last person. So there we go. Yes, so some really good questions. Now we've started looking at a lot of questioning in the way that we work in our various departments and schools that we work with, and just to look through it. Some of the answers that we've looked at through a lot of the research is that at the minute, Robert Marzano, looking at his book Classroom Instruction at Work, says that about 80% of teachers' instructions actually involve asking questions. Other research looks around at saying that we ask about 300 to 400 questions a day, which again is quite a high percentage. And the average question we pose is about every 43 seconds. But when we pose a question, we average just about less than a second to ask before students actually answer what it is we've asked them to do. And is it a good thing? Is questioning all it's scratched up to be if we're doing this amount of questioning and leaving that amount of time? Well, maybe, maybe not. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight, about how we can actually take our questioning and improve it. So the first thing I'm going to do is as follows. I'm going to look at what some of the common pitfalls are in the question techniques that we do. Now, as we go through this, all I want you to think about is, do you do these things? Do you know colleagues? Obviously, if you're observing other colleagues that do these things, and actually being very reflective, it is a great step for us then to take this forward and start thinking about how we can make these improvements. So the first thing we do is, or the next thing we want to do is this. In the chat box on the right hand side, what are the common problems with questioning? What are some of the things that we habitually do, or maybe you see other teachers in their lessons do, which you kind of think, oh, maybe you shouldn't have done like that. What are some of the things which you see that happen in lessons in the way that teachers actually ask questions to other people? And if you can actually write it in the chat box on the right hand side, and I'll start reading out some of the answers that come up. So the first one there, not giving pupils enough time, agenda bias, questions not being planned. Fantastic. If we keep coming through these, that'd be really good. Closed questions, asking the same pupils the same questions. Fantastic, yeah. Same students answering all the time. And last ones, yeah, bias to higher ability students. Right, brilliant. So what we're going to do is go through some of these because you've pretty much got quite a few of them. It's really easy to point these out, but obviously you do find yourself slipping into these habits accidentally throughout the day. Lessons go so quickly. I guarantee myself today I've done one of these things. It's one of these common problems. So the first thing is high achievers. We don't do this on purpose, sometimes purely through habit, purely about the worry of the pace of the lesson slowing down, the need to get to a correct answer quite quickly. We sometimes call upon high achievers more than we call upon low achievers. And again, sometimes we don't do this on purpose, but it's one of those things, it's a common pitfall, and it's something that obviously we need to obviously think about in our lessons as we go through, and something we need to tweak and maybe change. Another time, Kobe Bryant, back in 2012, having a go-to student who we rely on to give the answers in lessons. Again, we may not mean to do it, but observing lessons in the position I'm able to be in, observing people teaching lessons, it's quite obvious when the same kind of students are getting a bit stuck. The teacher has a go-to person, oh, what do you think over there? And getting that person to kind of keep the flow going. And again, do we do that? Is it something we see other teachers in other departments do? Is that one person when the lesson's slowing down that the teacher naturally just goes to? And again, if we can try and stop that and try and step away from that and get more inclusiveness in our question systems, then obviously that will only benefit the rest of the students. The next thing we talked about, obviously linked to the questions I had before, it's that less than a second we have before we actually pose a question and ask students to answer that question. Now the problem with that is, that the 1 second before we ask it and answer it is working memory. Students haven't got that long, that 1 second to quickly process and decode what it is that you've been asked, then to kind of process it in a working memory, then to go to their long-term memory and try and find it, and then actually to come back with anything deep and meaningful to share with the rest of the class. So again, it's that wait time and that sort of thing, one of the problems that we need to obviously try and work away from. Guessing what's in my head. I've seen a lot of teachers, and again myself, very guilty of this, asking questions unskillfully where students look very bemused at me. And actually, when I think about the question I've asked, unless they were actually in my head, that they were never going to get it. So again, it's about, can we actually break down our complex questions? They're one of the reasons that questioning isn't so effective in classrooms, and actually, can we actually try and stop these obscure, confusing questions that we pose to students? Another one is something called IRE, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this, but it's initiate, response, evaluate. Now, again, it's predominantly quite a big problem in classrooms where we actually pose a question, we ask, which is the initiate phase. We then ask for a response, so we go to one person, we say, okay, Paul, what do you think the answer is? That person gives their response, we evaluate it, and then we move on. We assume that because that one person has given us that one answer, that everybody in the class has actually got the same thing, and we're actually in that position to move forward. And IRE, posing it, asking one person, evaluating it, moving on, isn't actually a true representation of what's going on in the lesson, and something again that we need to be thinking when we're observing people, obviously in our own practice, that we need to try and stop doing, so we can actually open up more of a dialogue in our lessons as we go through. The next thing is, do we actually leave enough time when students are actually posing answers before we kind of jump in and not allowing students that time to explore it? Are we worried that sometimes when a student is slowly giving their answer and they're spending a bit longer than normal sharing what they're trying to say, do we quickly jump in and finish their sentences off for them? Now what that actually does is it kind of undermines what the students are sharing, and it shows the rest of the students, look, I don't really value what you're saying because we're not getting there quick enough. I want it sharp and snappy. I'm going to jump in and move on instead. And again, if we're seeing those sorts of things in our own practice and other people's practice, it's that sort of thing we need to think about developing. Now, there's lots of strategies out there to ensure that students get involved more in obviously sharing their answers in classes. Now, lots of research points at the fact that there's about 25% of students in a class who never actually answer a question, and that comes from Sadker and Sagter in 1985, their research paper. And that's quite alarming that a quarter of the class don't actually actively get involved in class questioning. And there's lots of things, there's lots of people saying, is it the fact that the students put their hands up, so naturally we gravitate towards those people, or is it other reasons where we don't actually pick 25% of the students in our class over a sustained period of time to share their answers? So again, looking back and reflecting, are we doing these sorts of things? And hopefully some of the ideas I'm going to show you in a moment kind of get 100% involvement in sharing their ideas and understanding.